Please join me in welcoming Professor Jonathan Katz, who serves as the director of the Maryland Cybersecurity Center. Professor Katz could not be here today, but he's going to join us via Skype because his flight was canceled.
So thank you very much. It's really great to be here speaking to you. I'm sort of upset that I'm not able to be there in person. I was really looking forward to the opportunity to be there with everybody and also to hear the other talks. Unfortunately, weather provided other plans. But I wanted to talk a little bit today about privacy-preserving computation, just to kind of introduce the topic and to talk about some recent advances in this field, and let you kind of think about potential applications of this relative to everything else you've been hearing about today. So let me start with an example to motivate the problem and to illustrate the kind of things that it can address. And I thought I'd start with an example that might be appropriate for Silicon Valley. So here we have two individuals, Alice and Bob, maybe meeting at the workshop today. And as they start to talk, right, one of them might claim that they're richer than the other person. And the other one says, no, well, if we want to find out which of us is the richer of the two, why don't we exchange exactly how much money we each have? But of course, neither one of them may be willing to share the exact amount of money they have, and neither one may be willing to go first in particular and reveal how much money they have before the other one does. So the question that we're faced with in this example is whether there's a way for Alice and Bob to determine which one of them has more money without revealing how much they each have. So notice actually that it's not only a problem about which one of them goes first, it's also that they may want to figure out the answer to this question without revealing the exact amount of money they have. Now, granted, this example may be a bit, or may seem a bit antiquated. It's so kind of last decade. So let's come to something a little bit more relevant, perhaps. Rather than figuring out which one of them has more US dollars in their bank account, they actually want to figure out which one of them owns more Bitcoin. Well, it's the same problem, right? They both want to determine which one of them has more Bitcoin, but they're not willing, either of them potentially, to reveal exactly how much they control. And the question again is whether they can determine which one of them owns more Bitcoin without revealing exactly how much they each have. Now, if you think about it a little bit, you realize immediately that there's at least one solution that they could think about, which is to rely on a central trusted party. And actually, whenever I put up this slide, I sort of comment or reflect on the fact that it's getting harder and harder to actually pick an appropriate image that might represent a party that at least a majority of people in the room might view as trusted. These slides, or at least this image was chosen a couple of years ago. It's an image of the Supreme Court of the United States, and I'll let you determine for yourselves whether you can view that as a trusted party or not. In any event, so they could rely potentially on a trusted party. And what they would do in that case is just basically send their private information to that party. So here we have Bob informing that trusted individual, that trusted entity, that he owns 0.9 Bitcoin, and Alice informing that entity that she controls 1.4 Bitcoin. And then that trusted entity could do the computation, could figure out which of them has more, and reveal the answer to both of them. So it can inform both of them that Alice, in this example, owns more Bitcoin. Now, the problem with this, of course, is that, number one, it's going to be difficult in general for two parties, and even more difficult for a larger number of parties, to agree on who this trusted entity could be. Another issue, of course, is that the trusted entity in this example, and in any example like it, learns the private information of both parties. And even if you are willing to allow this entity to learn the private information individually of the parties, it represents kind of a central point of failure in the system. Namely, if that trusted party is ever compromised, then those private inputs might be revealed to an attacker. So what we'd like to do instead is to dispense with this trusted party and have Alice and Bob figure out the answer on their own. So if we replace the trusted party, what we can do is try to have these individuals, Alice and Bob, interact by running some protocol. They'll exchange some messages back and forth, at the end of which they'll both learn which one of them actually has more money. And protocols for doing this, protocols that allow these two parties or allow any number of parties to run a computation of this sort without revealing private information that they're using in the computation, are generally referred to as secure computation protocols. Now, the guarantee that a secure computation protocol gives, and the guarantee that you should keep in your mind, is exactly that a protocol for secure computation provides an emulation of a central trusted party. So this is a very important point, actually, because without knowing any of the details of the underlying definition and the underlying cryptography, which can get quite complex, the abstraction that you should think about in your mind is exactly what's on this slide. Namely, that if you have a secure computation protocol being run between those parties, then the security guarantees that are being provided by that protocol are exactly the same guarantees that you would have in this ideal model that I had on the slide previous to that, where the parties could rely on an incorruptible trusted party to do the computation on their behalf. And so in particular, if you use a secure computation protocol to compute some function f over these parties' inputs, then doing so is as secure as having that trusted third entity compute the function on the party's behalf. And so if you think about what kind of security guarantees hold in that model, that will tell you exactly which security guarantees hold in the real world execution of this protocol. And so in particular, we can see that the parties are both going to achieve privacy, right? So the parties in this example are going to learn which one of them controls more Bitcoin without revealing to either party the exact amount of Bitcoin that either one of them holds. More generally, such a protocol also ensures correctness, right? It ensures in a more complicated computation that the answer that the parties receive actually corresponds to the function that they want to compute evaluated on some inputs of the other party. It guarantees availability. It guarantees that both parties, in fact, get the output. And it guarantees even some security properties that are less obvious and that you might not think about if you were going to try to specify one by one all the properties that you might achieve. And a good example of that is something called input independence. This will make more sense in a couple of slides, but basically what it ensures is that not only is the correct result being computed over the parties' inputs, but also that the parties are choosing their inputs. The parties are basically committing to their inputs in the protocol, independent of each other. One party can't make its input to be exactly one more than the other party's input, for example. And these security guarantees have to be able to hold even in the presence of malicious behavior. So if you have a secure computation protocol that's resilient to the misbehavior of some fraction of the parties, then you achieve exactly these security guarantees that are listed here, even in the face of arbitrary deviations from the protocol or arbitrary attempts by some number of the parties to make these security guarantees be violated. Now, so far I've been talking about the two-party setting, but there's nothing that prevents us from thinking about multiple parties, many more parties, doing the same sort of thing. So here's a picture where we have lots of different parties who all want to compute some function over their local inputs. And in this particular slide, I've demonstrated the example where they all can find and agree upon a trusted party who will compute the function on their behalf. So here we see them all sending their inputs to this trusted party who waits until it collects them all and then computes the function and returns the result to each of them. And just like before, we can imagine replacing this trusted entity with a secure computation protocol being run among all these parties. And the way I've illustrated it here is that each party will be exchanging messages with all others. In other cases, you might have different network topology. But in any event, the conceptual point is just that we have a secure computation protocol that can replace the trusted party and obviate the need for any central trusted entity. Now, again, I'm not going to give any details of the underlying cryptography here. I want you to walk away just understanding what secure computation provides. And if you're going to then try to use secure computation in some application, then basically all you need to do is think about the paradigm of having available to you a central trusted entity, a central trusted party that can run the computation on behalf of the players. And from that point of view, if you then want to use secure computation, all you need to do is to specify the code, specify the program, specify the function of what this ideal trusted party is supposed to be doing. Now that code can be arbitrarily complex. You could imagine representing it exactly as code in some high-level programming language, and it can be as complex as you like. Now, the caveat, of course, is that the efficiency of the protocol is going to depend on the complexity of the code that's being emulated by the protocol. But from a conceptual point of view, all that matters is to specify what you would do if you had access to a central trusted party, and then apply known secure computation protocols to allow these parties to compute that function to essentially emulate that trusted party in a distributed fashion. And just as an example, maybe a motivating example suitable for this workshop, we can imagine a very simple auction protocol where two entities, Alice and Bob from before, are trying to bid on some object. And the way they might do that, or one way they might do that, is to begin by having each of those parties put an encryption of their bid on the blockchain. So everything below that dashed line on the slide there maybe represents some public ledger that the parties can post their bids on. And what they can then do is they can then imagine how they would resolve the auction, how they would determine which of these parties wins the item if they had access to a trusted party. Well, what they would do is they would both send certain inputs to that trusted party, and we can imagine then the trusted party running some code like the following. So here I've just described it as a function f that's being run on the party's inputs. Bob's inputs are the three values to the left of the semicolon, and Alice's inputs are the three to the right of the semicolon. And the function or program is going to do something like the following. It's first going to take the key K provided by Bob, use that to decrypt the first ciphertext, and extract from that decryption a bid corresponding to the bid of Bob. Do the same on Alice's ciphertext to recover Alice's bid prime, and then return to both parties the answer indicating which of them bid higher. And in addition to that, returning potentially more information like what I've shown here in step 4 is that this trusted entity could even sign a statement vouching for the fact that number one, an auction was run involving the two ciphertexts C and C prime, and that that one of the parties, and indicating also which one of the parties outbid the other. Now, from this picture, you can see that in this process, number one, the actual bids of the two parties are never revealed. Right, all that we see from this execution here are the two ciphertexts of the parties on the blockchain, and then the outcome revealed by this trusted party, the signed statement by this trusted party revealing who won. And if we replace this trusted party then by a secure computation protocol, we get the same guarantees as what we have in this world, and so neither party has to reveal their bid. We also get the guarantee that I talked about before, namely correctness. So you're guaranteed now that if they run this protocol and generate some signature, it's guaranteed to be the correct answer and to correctly reveal which of the parties outbid the other. And finally, you can see here the importance of the input independence property I talked about earlier, because it would be very undesirable if Alice were able to always outbid Bob by $1 without knowing what Bob's bid was. But again, using secure computation will prevent that from happening and make sure that Alice's bid is independent of Bob's. Now, I haven't yet talked about feasibility of secure computation. So let me just say briefly that under reasonable assumptions, secure computation of any function against malicious behavior of any number of malicious parties is possible. So basically, anything you'd like to do, you can do. You can handle any number of parties. You can handle any fraction of malicious behavior, as long as you specify that as part of the protocol. And you can securely compute any function. So this is fantastic, actually, from the point of view of general feasibility results. And in fact, we've known this feasibility result since the late 1980s. So this is not something new on its own. What is new is the fact that historically speaking, from the 80s on until the early 2000s, secure computation was generally viewed as being of theoretical interest, but as being hopelessly impractical. And it was only in 2004 that we witnessed the first implementation of generic two-party computation. And even then, that was only in the so-called semi-honest setting, where the parties are assumed to behave honestly during the protocol. And the only guarantee then is that we try to prevent the parties from learning information from the protocol execution itself. And it was indeed inefficient, but nevertheless, it demonstrated that secure computation could work, could be implemented, could be run. And so from that point of view, represented a real milestone in this area. Now, if we look at the efficiency of secure computation over time, we see really dramatic advances in what kind of computations we can run. So here I'm just showing an example or a couple of data points for the case of two-party computation, again, with the semi-honest security here, which is a weak notion of security. And in the first couple of examples of instances of implementations, beginning with the fair play work in 2004 that I mentioned on the previous slide, what I've graphed here is the performance. This is in terms of Boolean gates per second, if we think about the underlying computation being represented as a Boolean circuit. And then on the right-hand side, looking at the maximum number of Boolean gates that could be supported. And so you can see there's a slow and steady growth, both in the efficiency and the number of gates. And then some work out of our own lab in 2011 gave a dramatic improvement by basically making a couple of optimizations and engineering enhancements to the underlying protocol that allowed us to dramatically improve both the performance as well as the size of circuits and the complexity of programs that could be supported. And these numbers I would say, roughly represent a state of the art as far as semi-honest security goes. They've been improved maybe by another factor of 2 or so, but not much more than that. In the malicious setting, which is the more complex case where we want to actually defend against malicious behavior by either of the parties, we've also seen dramatic improvements over the years. So in this case, it wasn't until 2009 that the first implementation of a malicious secure protocol was presented. And since then, we've seen a steady march down in improvement. This is now the total time on a logarithmic scale. And you can see there's really been an exponential improvement in the efficiency of protocols for secure computation over the last roughly just a little bit less than 10 years. So for example, this graph here is plotting the time required to do secure computation of the AES function, the block cipher, on inputs held by the two parties. And in 2009, the state of the art ran such a protocol. It took 18 minutes to run to securely evaluate AES. And now we're down to 37 milliseconds. So it's really been a tremendous improvement in the efficiency for these kind of protocols. Turning to the multi-party setting, I just wanted to highlight some recent work out of my own lab in the at the end of last year, which showed some new techniques for malicious security in the multi-party setting that could handle an unbounded number of corruptions. So here, it could even be just one honest party interacting with a whole bunch of other malicious players, and even so, that malicious party is protected against the misbehavior of the other entities. And here we showed the largest scale example of secure computation to date. We carried out a secure computation of AES among 128 parties scattered across 5 continents with an online running time, meaning running time after the parties knew their inputs, of about 2 seconds. And this was larger than any other prior protocol in terms of the number of parties involved, and also faster as well. Just let me comment a little bit about what I've seen in terms of real-world interest and deployment of secure computation protocols. There's been sort of a steady interest from startups and industry, beginning with a demonstration of using secure computation for a secure auction in Denmark in 2008. And since then, a number of other companies have sprung up seeking to market secure computation to businesses. And we've also seen at the same time a lot of interest from the US government in funding work related to secure computation. We've seen both from DARPA and IARPA beginning in 2008, 2009, up to a program announced last year by IARPA, the Hector program. So the DoD is investing heavily in this technology as well. And what's also been really exciting to watch is this work coming out of Senator Wyden's office. This is a quote from May 2017. He's been very active, actually, in pushing the use of secure computation for privacy-preserving generation of statistics. And he said, in particular, he was talking about a commission on evidence-based policymaking that he was trying to help get off the ground. And he was strongly urging the commission to recommend that privacy-enhancing technologies like secure multi-party computation be used in order to gather and generate these statistics and then draw public policy-related insights from private data of Americans. And in this particular example, he was actually seeking to apply this to to collecting statistics about students at institutions for higher education. And I saw some recent progress on that front just a few days ago, actually. I don't know whether they're going to actually be using secure computation, but I do know that his office is at least recommending that that's one option for how these statistics about students could be generated while preserving the privacy of individual students. Just to conclude here, let me say these are really exciting times for the field. I've been working in this area for about 15 years, and I've seen it go from something that was really just a theoretical pipe dream to something that's now on the verge of becoming more widely deployed. This has been in large part due to the tremendous advances in protocol design that we've seen take place over the past few years that have really improved the performance and scalability of these protocols exponentially. As a result of that, we've seen a lot of increasing interest from government and startups and industry. And I hope the trend seems to be, and I hope it'll continue to be the case, that we see greater deployment of these ideas in the near future. So thank you very much for your attention. I'm happy to take questions if that's an option and if there's time. And otherwise, you can take a look at my webpage and see some of the papers relevant to the graphics that I put up earlier in the talk. So thank you very much for your attention.